Okay, I'm just going to share a bit of code that I've written because it addresses something I'm not seeing addressed on the internet, and I think it's a situation that's probably going to come up in the future in different ways as well, and this code might be a good jumping off point for people. So the problem I had was I'd published a WordPress website using the Gutenberg editor about a year ago now, and the Gutenberg editor's advanced a fair bit in that time, and one thing that has changed here, I'd added a PDF file to the document, and at the time that was the only thing we could do, but now we've got this new PDF settings show inline embed toggle, which actually embeds the PDF. Now I actually knew this was coming at the time, so I didn't want to use a third-party solution. I wanted to keep it simple, stick with Gutenberg. But I kind of knew I'd added, I think, 800 of these documents, and I kind of knew that sooner or later I was going to have to manually change all these, and obviously I don't want to literally do that manually, I want to do it programmatically. As far as I can see, there is nothing provided to help us do this, which makes sense really, I think. So what I did, I had a look at the code. So this is just taken from the SQL table, and it is literally just a post content field. There's nothing clever going on. It is just the post content on the page, and at the top we've got one without the embedded PDF, and at the bottom we've got an example with. So I wanted to see what the differences were and how feasible it was going to be to fudge those differences in code. So Gutenberg blocks are topped and tailed with a HTML comment, and that comment includes a JSON object, and at the end of the JSON object we can see here we've got preview, display preview false, and on the version with the embedded PDF we've got display preview true, which is fine. There's also a third situation, which is that for a file added before we had the option to embed, this display preview property wouldn't be there at all. So there are two different patterns we need to match when we're looking for something that wants updating. Then all the HTML code is absolutely identical, with the exception of the object that's added in order to embed a PDF in the page. And when we have a look through the information that's required to create that, all the information is either consistent, known constants, or it can be derived from the anchor tags below. So I realised that it was going to be possible to recreate that object just with the information we've got in the original version. So all looked good. So the code I've come up with, it's brittle code. It works in this situation only. It was written on the hoof. There was no planning. I'm sure you know what it's like. This is a write it once, run it, pretty much bin it kind of situation. So I wasn't looking for beautiful code, optimized code. It works. That's all I need to worry about. So don't give me too much grief. Let's see if I can make it a bit bigger over this code, please. Okay, so what I did was just write a single PDF file, which I've called inline-pdf, and I will literally just type the address to this file into the browser's address bar and run this page. So it's all, a quick and dirty job. And I've chosen to put this page, we've got the themes directory, that's the custom theme, so I made a little folder called ops for operations, and called it inline PDF. This file could live anywhere really, but that seems a nice sensible place. And when I've finished with it, I'll call it inline-pdf.disabled or something similar, just so it can't be run. But I've still got it if I ever want to come back and use the code in a different project or in this project for a different reason. So actually I put a comment there with the link, and that was just so I could then copy and paste that into the browser when I was testing. And that's obviously I tested, you can see there, I was very good, tested it on my local copy. Obviously this sort of code that's directly updating the database wants to be well tested. So the first thing I came up with was the pattern matching for the content that needed updating. So I've just got some very, very simple regex expressions, thankfully. I hate regex, so I was glad that really I just took, the only things we didn't know was the ID would vary, so I've just put .star, and the actual href to the document was going to vary, so again .star, and that's it. So that's matching for the newer code that includes this display preview parameter when it's set to false, and this is the old code constant, which is matching for the version that predated the display preview parameter. I've also got a third one here, which was for valid code. When it's checking, does this code need updating? If it finds that code, it can say no, and it gives you the option of reporting how many have been successfully updated, which can be obviously useful information. So that's a helper function, which we might as well discuss now. Is update required? Hopefully that's a nice self-documenting name. Gets past the content. So it checks on the two pattern matches we've just discussed that would mean it needs updating, and returns either 1 or 2. But also if it's already been updated, I actually echo fixed to the page just as a bit of a debugging tool, and return false. And if it doesn't match any of these, that basically means there probably isn't a WP file block on the page full stop, in which case we don't need to update it, so it also returns false. I'd initially expected this to just return true or false, but I realised that if I let the code know, are we dealing with the new or the old at this stage, because we've had to check both anyway, it saves me checking again later. So we return 1 or 2, both of which are going to evaluate to true, or we return false if it's fixed, or if no fixed is required because it just isn't included. So then we get into the main routine. So the first thing we do is load in the WordPress dependencies, which just allows us to use those tools. Needn't really have done that. I could have just addressed it as a SQL statement, just talk to the table, but WordPress makes these things easy for us. And I think it always wraps you in a slightly more secure, it makes it a little bit harder to cock it all up, I think, so I figured I'd do it this way. So I've used the getPost function, arguments, post type. At first for testing I was saying get post types to update everything at once, but really because this website, ultimately I'm going to apply it to live data, I knew there was a few exceptions. 99% of it does want to be embedded. There was a few exceptions where it didn't, so I wanted to do a post type at a time, and then I could go into the site and just manually fudge a few that I didn't want to be embedded. Number posts -1, which means infinite, means every post. When I was testing, I tended to do it in batches of 10, so you change 10, you could go back and check it, and if there was a bug to iron out, say 20 next time, the first 10 would have been done, but you've now got another 10 to go at, and that helped me go through the debugging process, because I was slowly running out of data to obviously test on. Ultimately, do take a backup of your data before you start this, because you can re-import that and run it again. But by just moving 10 at a time, it meant I wasn't having to re-import a database every iteration of testing this. So we get our posts, we put them into a post variable. I've also set a counter, which says how many's been updated. Again, that's just helpful debugging. It's a bit of a sanity check. It's nice to see some figures coming out that look about right. So we say if posts, if anything's been returned. I echo how many posts have returned. Again, just purely a sanity check. If I put in a post type there and it says nothing returned, I know I've probably typed the post type wrong. Then I loop through for each posts as post, and I echo a link to, I echo the post ID, the current post ID, but I also made that a link. So I could right click it, say open in new tab, and then have a look at the post that's been updated and check that what I expected to happen has happened. So now I pick up the content for the post in this current loop. Say if there is content, just in case it's empty or something's gone wrong. This is when we set the flag update required using that little function we've already gone through and passing it the content. And then I've used a while loop because I thought that it's possible there's going to be more than one on a page. So this way it'll loops through, it finds the first update that's required. And if you go back to how that function works, you'll see that if one's been updated, it knows that an update isn't required on that one, but it might fall through and find another. So this attempts to just do one update, the first one that it comes across that's required, and then it'll hit the bottom of this do while, and it'll rerun update required. Let me show you that here. So it checks that having fixed it, do we still need to fix it, i.e. is there a second or a third one, and it'll keep looping through until update required equals false. And that works very nicely. If update required equals 1, so this is where if there is an update required, obviously if there isn't, it's false, we come out of this loop. But if it evaluates to true, which is to say it's a 1 or a 2, we know from that information whether we're looking at the new code with that parameter, what was it called? Display preview parameter, or the old code without. So we can then look for a match, a match in our content. Yes, that's right. So the way this function works, although preg match returns true or false, it also returns an array of matches in a variable that you specify as the third parameter. So I've called it matches. So the first thing is the comment is going to need updating. Actually, before we get into that, the first thing to say, one of the reasons I thought I'd make this video is you don't ever want to be messing about parsing strings if you can possibly help it. And I kind of thought this was going to be a 2-minute job, because I was going to throw it into the PHP DOM parser and treat it all as a load of nodes, and it would be very easy to modify a parameter on a node, add another node. You know, I thought that would be done and dusted in a few lines. And it turns out something I kind of knew but forgot I knew was that the DOM parser in PHP doesn't support HTML5. So it balks, possibly not at this code actually, but it balks on a lot of the pages because they did include HTML5 elements. You can get around that by importing other people's libraries, but this was a one-page, one helper function, one function bit of code. I did not want to import a library and learn how to use a library for something that wasn't going to take, it just didn't warrant the learning, the time I'd spend. The other option would have been, there's a sort of an XML crawling function as well in PHP that also doesn't like this code, and I didn't spend any time at all looking into that. I might have been able to use that. I do wonder if it just balked at the JSON inside the comment, although you would think it would just ignore anything it finds in a comment, but I suspect that's what happened, but it didn't see it as valid content. So I sort of had to bite the bullet and start messing about with this code, which really is horrible code, but it's where we are and it works. So firstly then, we need to get the comment. So we've identified the comment using preg match and the two regex, new code, old code. And that's about the only string function in PHP that will use regex. Otherwise it might have been a bit simpler. So here's our comment in a variable called comment. So I wanted to find the start of the JSON object and the end of the JSON object, which are wrapped obviously with these curly braces. And that way we could extract out the JSON text. So strpos to get the position of that character in that string, and again for the end. Then substring, that's your starting string, start at the start, end at, well, you have to give it a length. So you say the end minus the start, and then I think +1 just from trial and error. That's what you need, just the way things pan out. It's usually easier to trial and error than try and get your head around how the length affects it, but anyway. So that's what I did. So that gave me JSON, and then happy days, I could then just decode that JSON into an array. So that's my object. That's my JSON object, and that meant I could say JSON display preview parameter equals true. And the lovely thing about that is there's no way of making a typo. Well, there is, but you're not going to affect the outputted JSON. If display parameter equals false, it's going to fix it to true. If display parameter doesn't exist, it's going to create it and fix it to true. And both those situations are applicable. So that's brilliant, all sorted in one line of code. We don't have to care if it's there or not, because either way, that's just going to sort it. So new variable, JSON text, and just re-encode that JSON object back to a string, and then insert it in the comment using substring replace. I suppose we'll talk through that in a second. Just one of the little gotchas I found here was that when the JSON was encoded back to a string, it actually escaped all the slashes, which was a problem because it's full of slashes because there's URLs in there. So as long as we use that constant, it stops that behavior. And I was getting a perfectly formatted JSON string, just like the one that we'd took out there. So yeah, so then we pop that string back into our original comment. So that's our original text. That's the text we're going to insert. JSON start was the start point, and JSON end was the JSON, same conversation. We have to give it a length, and we know that that's the length. And that is in the original comment variable. That's the position that we're chopping out, the beginning and end of that position. And the length of what we're putting in may well be different, almost certainly will be here. That doesn't matter. What we're specifying here is the start and the end, excuse me, of the bits we're chopping out. So what we've done is we've just extracted the JSON object from the comment and put it into the comment. Now we need to put the comment back into the content, and we do it in exactly the same way. We've already got the start point here because matches has an array that where the 0 element is the matched text, the matched string, and the one indexed argument element is the starting point of that string from where it was cut out from the original. So we've already got the starting point, and then the end, I was just able to have a look for the closing comment, and I started from the start point because if there are multiple instances on the page, we need to keep sure that we don't start searching at the beginning of the page, because we might find a closing comment. Well, it might be nothing, it might not even be this kind of block. We need to know we're finding the right closing comment, and that's going to be the next one after the starting point. And again, that needed fudging with a +3 because there's 3 characters there, and it's going to find that the starting point there, and what we actually want to talk about is the end. So just a +3 there. And then I was able to use substring replace again to replace the entire comment in the content in exactly the same way as we replaced the JSON object in the comment before. So now we add the object. So first, yes, so we get the anchor tag that's already there and mine it for data. And this is where it would have been so nice to just use some sort of DOM parser, but never mind. We search for the anchor start. So I just looked for a href, and what does insert end do? Insert end, yes. So that's finding the first anchor tag after the comment that we've just worked on. So that was the end of the comment. And again, just to keep sure we're working in the block we want to be working in and not somewhere else on the page, because there's going to be tons of anchors floating about. And then the end, I looked for the closing tag, and I started the search at anchor start. Exactly the same reasons we just discussed. Keep sure it's the correct one, not just a one. And then +4 again, just moved on to the end because that's 4 characters. So now I was able to use the DOM document because we were just looking at the anchor tag. I wasn't trying to parse the whole content, which it wasn't going to be happy with, but just an anchor tag, that's okay. So anchor equals new DOM document. Then we use the load HTML method to bring in, what have I done here? The substring of the content, anchor start, anchor end, minus anchor start. Yes, so we're just loading in the anchor. That's the quick way of saying that. So now I extract the URL, because I can say anchor, get elements by tag name A, item 0, get attribute href, and then the same for the caption, text content. I've created a variable called caption, and it's for the content of the anchor tag, the actual text you see on the screen. And I could have done a variable, obviously, to save me searching that out twice, but you know, as I say, this is hacky code, it's not production code, it doesn't have to be the most efficient thing in the world. Let me just wrap the text. So then we need to create this object string so we can insert it. So object HTML, obviously object, the class is just constant, the data, we need the URL, which we've just extracted, the type is constant, that style is constant. That might be a problem if you were using, or if you wanted to use different styles in different places, but my site's been consistently like that, so that wasn't a problem for me. Now then there's an ARIA label, and that has the words embed of, and then it has the exact caption or the exact text that appears in the anchor tag, which is what I've got in this caption variable. Caption wasn't the best name for that. Then it has a full stop at the end. I'll come back to that in a minute. And then you close the object. And then I was able to HTML entity to code. What was all that about? Okay, yes, there was something funny went on with bullet points, where it had turned, I'm trying to remember which one it was. I can't remember exactly, but it turned a bullet point that was in this text, the anchor text, and it turned it into the HTML entity for a bullet point. And it might have been a red herring, but I believe I'm right in saying that Gutenberg didn't like that. It saw it as invalid. So this way I was able to turn it back into a bullet point before I stored it back into my content variable. And we've just used the substring replace, just like we've used it a few times now, to pop it in the right place. Oh yes, and because the length is going to be 0, because we're not cutting out any text, we're simply inserting text at the anchor start position, but the length is 0 because we're not cutting, we're inserting. So then, as I've said here, commit the update to the database. So I've got the post variable, which is an array for the post ID and the new content, then WP update post. Then I echo to the screen that it's updated. And that updated falls on the end of this echo here. So it becomes post ID with the link, then a space, then the word updated. Then I increment the counter to say that one's been updated, and then I redo the test update is update required, which resets the variable. So when I do the while loop, will fall out once everything that requires updating has been updated. Then finally I echo the counter to say how many updates were made, and we've got a little error condition there, which when we said if posts, well, if there isn't, it's going to say found no posts. And that's the whole code. I did say I'd come back to this caption. So this is a good gotcha that had me stumped for quite a while, actually, wasted a fair bit of time. When I ran this code initially and looked at the front end of the website, it all worked. Happy days. When I went to edit one of the pages, suddenly it said it had everything on the screen as it should be, but it also said that this block was corrupt and gave me the option to attempt recovery, which it could do. So then I had to go into the database and take a look at the code, then do the recovery, take a look at the code again. And I really couldn't find any differences. Initially, I did see that some bullet points had turned into HTML entities, which we've covered. And I haven't gone back to retest if that was relevant or not. I kind of suspect it was, but I haven't tested. But what it turned out, I noticed that I had missed on the ARIA label, I had missed the full stop off the end of that line of text. But I couldn't imagine that Gutenberg thought this object not having a full stop at the end of its ARIA label made it invalid. And I even went, I got a bit of software, that converts, you put your two lots of text in, it shows you all the differences. And the only difference in the end was this full stop. So I put it in desperation, and everything worked beautifully. So Gutenberg is obviously hypersensitive to the format of everything, which, to be honest, I applaud, because it's the first sort of page builder that hasn't produced absolute garbage code that just always becomes corrupt. The more you edit it, the more corrupt it gets. Well, Gutenberg code is clean, and I guess this shows why. It's obviously very particular about its output. But anyway, gotchas to be aware of, I suppose. The Gutenberg code isn't going to go into the DOM document as a whole, because the HTML5 elements, it didn't go into the, is it XML document? The XML equivalent anyway. And I didn't look into that, but I really suspect it's because it didn't like the JSON in the comments. And when you do the output, it really does have to be a very close match. Well, no, it has to be identical, It has to really match perfectly what Gutenberg's expecting, or it'll say it's a duff block. And you won't know that until you go into the edit screen. So that's a bit of testing that you mustn't miss out. Okay, I hope that helps somebody, even if it's just me in the future.